Today, we'll hear from Rafaela Crevoshay, an expert in compost, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable soil management. This is the fourth of many webinars for which she will be joining us. Please welcome back, Rafaela Crevoshay.
Thanks, Emma. And let's just get this screen share up here. There we are. Is that it? That's it. There we go. Thanks, and I really appreciated that short video you just made because it puts into perspective all the hype we've heard about sustainability, which is yesterday's news. And what's going to take us forward is regenerative agriculture. And what we are doing here in the gardening space is integrating regenerative practices with organic practices. So again, welcome everybody. And we're going to talk about worms today. Now, why worms? There are so many organisms in the soil. Why are we picking on these little critters? Well, they do something magical. They transform the soil like nothing else. There are other organisms in the soil, microfauna, bacteria, fungi that play important roles, but nothing transforms soil like earthworms. Nothing. Now, the kind of worms that we're using is very specific. There are thousands of species of worms. Not all of them are very suitable for helping us in the garden, but many are. However, the worm of choice for gardening are the red wigglers. There are a few others that work well, but the red wigglers have some unusual characteristics. For one thing, they are epigeic, which means that they work their way up from the bottom up. So if you've got, for example, a worm farm container, and the worms have been working it, you'll take the finished soil from the bottom. So that's a convenient thing. They're very effective for making vermicompost and for enhancing gardens. Now, here we are. Now, with regard to how they work, there's a pretty complicated chart there on the right side. But worms can't chew anything. The material that they ingest through their mouths has to be softened, has to be moist and soft. So they can't really eat a whole coffee bean, but they could eat coffee grounds that have already been processed and that are wet and easily ingested into their system. And their gizzard is very well equipped with devices that pulverize the food as it goes through. And this is where all the magic happens, is in the worm's body. And eventually the worms excrete worm castings, which are the basis of vermicompost or worm compost. And those castings are transformed by enzymes and possibly other chemicals. It's a pretty complex process, and then they're excreted. Now, worms can eat any kind of organic matter, pretty much any kind, as long as it's something that they can ingest. In other words, bones, for example. Bones are organic matter, but worms can't eat them readily. They have to be crushed and moistened before the worms could ingest them. But they can eat everything else. Kitchen waste, great worm food. So if you've been looking for a destination for your kitchen waste other than the landfill, this is a perfect place to put them. Worms can eat just about any kind of produce waste or cooking waste, whether it's pasta or even leftover meat or fish, any kind of vegetables. Worms love cardboard. That's something you can use pretty generously. Uh, they'll they'll feast on it. They will just be crazy for it. I don't know why, but they seem to love it. They can do grass clippings, leaf waste. You can take your fall leaf pile and put worms in it, and they'll convert it. Paper egg cartons. That's something that I've noticed the worms absolutely go crazy for. And coffee grounds. Wonderful. And that's something that you could do even if you don't have your own kitchen waste at home. You can go to your local coffee shop and ask for their waste. Chances are they'll be happy to give it to you. And you don't need that much to get it started, and the worms will eat it. The only caveat that I would suggest with regard to these food inputs for worms is that some of them have more nutritive value than others. So if you're just feeding them cardboard, don't expect the greatest results because you may not get it. But a diet of diversified kitchen waste is a real positive thing. So what are the benefits of vermicompost? Well, there are many benefits, and it's something that I would urge everyone to consider making a little worm farm, and supplementing your garden with vermicompost. First of all, it's loaded with available and stored plant food. So fresh vermicompost is ready to go. It has some nutrients immediately available to the plants, and it has much more that are stored and become available as bacteria and fungi work it and break it down. In the best circumstances, it obviates the need for supplemental fertilizers. And we're talking not only about avoiding industrial fertilizers, but even organic fertilizers aren't going to add much to your gardening experience if you've got a good supply of rich vermicompost. Because it's not only got all the nutrient content to it, it has a huge population of fungal mycelia, and important bacteria. And these things play a key role in plant health. And then finally, it's rich in available humic acid. Now, this is something that isn't talked about so much, but humic acid is really kind of the holy grail of the gardening experience. It's not a hormone, but it functions like a hormone. It causes the plants to behave, to accomplish extraordinary things. Just to kind of summarize. Now, there are other sources of humic acid, and mainly the one that's economically available is a kind of a coal, COAL, that is mined in certain places in the world. It's got to be at least 1 million years old to have this humic acid, and it does have it in it, but it's released very slowly. So you'll see a lot of ads for humic acid, and this sort of thing is okay, but its application is somewhat limited because it takes time for it to break down in the soil. And you'll get some benefit immediately, and the rest of it will happen slowly over coming years. But the humic acid in vermicompost is available now, and it's not 1 million years old. It made last month. It's an amazing feature of the vermicompost experience, and I urge everyone to give it a good look. Okay, let me just, I gotta move this thing. Okay, there we go. So what are the benefits of what are the other benefits of vermicompost? Well, for one thing, it aggregates the soil. You know, it accumulates small particles of soil into larger aggregations of soil that we consider to be ideal for soil structure. And that stabilizes the soil. And it can be made from an extensive array of organic materials. Another feature of vermicompost is its ability to interfere with diseases. Now, this chart is from a study that was done at Cornell. I don't know, it's probably at least 10 years, maybe 15 years ago. And what they found was that vermicompost actually causes the disease producing spores to shy away from the plant root hairs. It doesn't kill them, but it interferes, it interrupts them, and they cannot infect the plant. So it's believed that there are many other functions of this. This was for the Pythium disease, I believe, but it's believed that this applies to many other species of bacteria and pathogenic fungi that can affect your plants. So vermicompost all around gets the A+. I mean, this is our the goal. It's the best vehicle for successful gardening. But that's not the only thing you can do with worms. You can put worms into your garden, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, how are you going to grow worms at home? Well, there are many dozens of devices available on the market that you can purchase, or you can DIY it if that's your preference. And these range from small tabletop situations that can fit in your even in your kitchen or in your basement or in your garage, to massive drums that process a lot of material. You can do that too as well. It's just a matter of what suits your situation, what suits your budget, what's going to suit your working habits. But it'll give you a source of fresh vermicompost, and it'll have all those properties we just discussed. This is a wonderful thing. So I would strongly urge everyone to think about getting some kind of device to start producing this at home. And by the way, it will be a solution for your kitchen waste. You won't have to dump it anymore into your garbage. You put it in here, feed it to the worms, and they'll transform it. So we've dealt with the vermicompost issue, which is a big issue, but also worms are for the garden. You can take a bunch of your worms that you're growing in one of those devices and put it into your soil. Now you could just do it like you see in the photo here and dig up some soil and put the worms in. I wouldn't dig very much. We don't like to dig in the regenerative model, but the worms actually don't need much help, much shovel help. They'll find their way down there. But they aerate the soil. They create tunnels that improve the drainage. They deposit their castings throughout the root zones. So there's a lot of benefits for the plants, and they transform soil organic matter into available nutrients. So it's a it's a no-brainer. You want to do that too. We're doing two things with worms. We're making vermicompost and we're putting them directly into the garden. Now, not only the red wigglers can work in this way. In the garden, you'll find a lot of native species and other species that that do good work, and they should be encouraged. But the red wigglers is what you want to use for making vermicompost, with very few exceptions. This is an iconic book by Mary Applehoff. It's already been in print a few decades, and it's still the Bible. Worms eat my garbage. Yeah, right. They eat your garbage, and they do marvelous things. This treats pretty much every aspect of worm culture at home and how to apply them into your garden. And finally, we have another resource, which is Rhonda Sherman. She's the worm specialist at North Carolina State. She has an annual conference every year on vermicomposting that attracts many commercial vermicomposters, but it's open to everyone, and it's a chance to really absorb a lot of information. So if you're interested, keep this in mind. Rhonda is she's a master of this procedure. So pretty much that's it. I want to thank Deep Roots, Estelle Carroll, for helping with the presentation, and you've got my email here if you want to reach me. So let's open it up to questions and see what we can. I'll do my best to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Rafaela.
You're welcome.
We have plenty of time for questions, folks, so feel free to keep sending them in through the chat. Oh, my screen just moved. All right, here we go. I have a couple of questions about things worms may or may not be able to digest. What about oils, Rafaela?
Oils, yeah, they can digest it. As long as they can ingest it, they can digest it. So if they can get it into their gut, it can be broken down.
Does this same goes for citrus then, it sounds like?
Yeah, in general, yeah, citrus is all right. Some people prefer not to use citrus. There's a school of thought that it's not something that the worms prefer, and that may well be the case, but they can break it down. They can.
Okay. Mark S asks whether putting weeds with flowers and seeds into compost, do the worms ingest those? Or I think what this question is really getting at is if those things go into a compost pile, will seeds sprout from them?
Well, seeds that worms can ingest aren't going to survive. They're just not going to survive. But there are a lot of seeds that are too big for worms to ingest that will come back and reproduce. So in general, you may have to live with some of those species, but many of them will be consumed and transformed.
All right. There's a couple questions about whether red wigglers are native or invasive, and if they might do something.
Yeah, I was waiting for this question. Okay, so yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, they're invasive. I mean, technically, they're not from here. They're European in origin. But let's talk about invasive species. Cattle, chickens, sheep. These are all from elsewhere. And we've found a way to balance it and live with them. There are some species, for example, the Asian carp, which is really causing serious problems in Midwestern waterways. That's a problem. And there is a worm that came from Europe that's causing a lot of problems in Michigan. Apparently, what's going on is it has invaded the forest lands. It eats the top layer of the mulch in the forest and leaves the ground bare. This is definitely not good. We have to deal with it. So it's really a matter of degree. Some of these invasive species are serious problems, but they're not. They're not by definition a serious problem. There's a lot of invasive species or foreign or exotic species, let's call them, that really don't cause that kind of disruption and harm. And the red wigglers, I think, is in that category.
Okay. Where would one buy these worms?
Yeah, you can get red wigglers anywhere. You can get them online. If you go to some of these community websites, like I think it's called Offer Up, and there's a couple of others where people are just selling things locally, you'll find them. You'll be surprised at how available they are. You can buy them by the weight or by the count, and you don't need that many to get started. Once you get started and get going, you'll have them forever.
Okay. Could you explain the difference between compost and vermicompost?
Yeah, sure. Compost, it's good stuff when it's done right. And it's basically organic matter that's been transformed by heat and oxygen into kind of a soil or a pre-soil condition. And it's got lots of bacteria and fungi in it, and it's very great thing to add to your soil or to use as soil. In fact, we recommend that if you're using raised beds, just fill it with compost, standard compost, good quality stuff. You want compost that's manure based and thermophilically processed, that it's with heat. Usually, which it generates itself at 140 degrees and more Fahrenheit. Now, what's the difference? The difference is that vermicompost is compost that has been fed to worms or invested with worms, and then the worms do their magic, and their magic is all in their gut. They break it down. They change the microbial background of the product. So I can share with you that a few years ago we had the privilege of testing some vermicompost through a genomic sequencer. That's a device that basically takes a census of all of the microbial life that's in that soil. So we did it for compost and we did it for vermicompost. Compost came out with a very high rating. It has lots of compost and lots of bacteria and lots of fungi in it. And when I submitted the sample of vermicompost, the researcher told me, well, compost is pretty high in this stuff. Well, they sequenced it and they came back and said to me, my God, I can't believe it. This is beyond our wildest dreams, that there's such a robust population of microbes in the vermicompost. So vermicompost is still the winner. I have not heard of anything that can compete with it in terms of its microbial content.
All right, thank you. This is a bit more of a composting question, but what's the best ratio of dirt to kitchen waste for a worm bin?
Dirt to kitchen waste?
That's the question.
Well, I don't know where the dirt comes in. I mean, basically, if you're vermicomposting at home, You don't add any dirt. You don't need to add any dirt. Some people add some bedding to the bottom of the worm bin. I don't think that's even necessary, but that bedding could be something like coconut husks, something fibrous like that, even peat moss. But I'm not aware of uh, any application for soil to add any soil to it at all.
Okay. Laura asks, how warm can a worm farm get? As she lives in the Arizona desert.
How warm? Yeah, well, yeah, Arizona, you need to keep it cool. You can't you want to keep it maximum in the low 70s maximum. So find a shady spot, put it indoors somewhere, or cover it up with a roof or a tent, and that should be enough. So long as it doesn't get the direct sun, constantly heating it up, it should be okay. But yeah, that's a concern in places like the Southwest. So keep it in mind.
Is
But you
there,
can do it successfully. I'm sorry. I
okay.
want to just say you can do it very successfully there. You can.
Is there ever a point where a worm colony should be divided or given more space?
Yeah, when you want to when you want to increase your population, sure. You'll see a lot of worms in there at some point, and that's all right. You can just leave it as is. But if you want to use that as your opportunity to launch a second worm farm, take a couple of handfuls of worms, put the substrate in there, and it'll take off. It's kind of unlimited because they'll just keep going and going and going. But they're all right in their original place if that's as far as you want to go with it. One thing I would do when you get a really high population of worms concentrated in a small container, that's a good time to take some out and put them directly into the garden.
Hmm. Can you start a composting worm farm in a black plastic garbage can?
Yes, you can do that. You can do anything. There are a lot. If you go online, you can find many plans for DIY worm bins. And now using a composting, using a black, how did you describe that, Emma?
A black plastic
A
trash can.
black plastic trash can. What I've seen is that usually they want to poke drainage holes and something like that, and you can adapt it. You can certainly do it and be successful.
All right. Is it best to lay compost on top of existing soil or work it into
Yeah.
the ground a bit?
Yeah, well, this is really a question about regenerative farming practices. And in the regenerative model, we don't like to till soil. We don't like to dig soil up. So what we do is just put it on the surface of the soil. Now, there's one caveat there is that if you're putting good compost on top of the soil, and if you don't cover it up with something, either a living plant or mulch, it'll dry out, and that's not positive. Though the result of the exercise overall will be positive, it's worth bearing in mind that you should always use mulch or make sure you have young plants coming up to protect the soil. But don't dig it in. Don't because what happens when you dig in, it kind of defeats the whole regenerative exercise in the sense that you know in old growth forests, excuse me, there are enormous mycelial networks, fungal networks throughout, and those do marvelous things. They'll take nutrients from one tree and give it to one that's hungry. They'll do the same thing with water. They do all kinds of ecosystem services. Now, because because agriculture for the last 10,000 years has been plowing the soil. We don't have that benefit. But now we do with the regenerative concept that does not disturb the soil. These mycelia have an opportunity to get established and do some of the things for our crops that they've always been doing for the old growth forest. I wish I had more information on that, but this is a very new phenomenon. It's only for the last few years, maybe a decade at most, that we've actually been stopping tilling and digging in the soil. So you want to be careful to integrate this into your practices. Another thing that you can practice is when a crop is finished. Let's say your tomato plant, it's finished, you're done. A lot of people typically, historically, will pull it out of the ground. Don't do that. You just want to cut it off at the surface, compost the plant stock itself, the residue of the plant, and leave the root system in place, because that root system is playing an important role in the nutrition of mycelia and fungi and will benefit you in the future.
All right. This person shared that they have a vermicomposter and thought they were getting worm tea, but were told that they needed to have a more advanced process with the actual castings. But that seems pretty time consuming. Can you speak to that in any way?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. They're saying that
The person shared that they get brown water from the vermicomposter,
yeah,
but was told that it isn't actually the worm tea and that requires a more advanced process.
that brown water is great stuff, and I would question whether that's an accurate comment that there's that it doesn't have anything in it. It's likely to have dissolved worm castings in it, and you should definitely save that and apply it to your garden. You'll have some drainage, yeah, so you use it for your garden. As far as the other comments are concerned, I don't really understand where that question is coming from. If you've got worms working the organic matter, you're going to get vermicompost, and that's a win. But if the person that submitted that question would like to get in touch with me, please do, and we can have a conversation, because I'm not sure that I understand the context.
All right, thank you. This person wonders if night crawlers will survive in their compost pile or garden.
Yeah, well, night crawlers are great, but they have different habits. Remember, I said about the red wigglers; they are epigeic. They grow from the bottom up. Night crawlers have all kinds of nocturnal behaviors that come out on the ground at night and then go deep in the day. That's difficult to manage. I mean, it's good that you have them if you have them, and they should be encouraged. But they're pretty difficult to manage. They're impossible to manage, actually.
Um, I just imagined a night crawler like talking back.
Yeah, right. They'll talk back to you.
Um,
Right.
what could you tell us a little bit more about jumping worms and whether they're bad?
I've heard of those. I'm not very familiar with jumping worms. I can't say that they're bad. I don't know why they would be bad. I believe those are an invasive species. You might have some in your garden area, and you may not. I've never seen them, so I can't really comment on them.
Okay. Can all types of red wigglers grown indoors also survive in the outdoor garden or compost pile?
They can up to a point. If you, excuse me, it really depends on the severity of your winter. So in warm temperate climates, they'll survive. I live in California. They're good all year. They're just fine, and they will be throughout the South and the U.S. But as you go north, they will die off. Now that doesn't necessarily wipe out the colonies because the eggs, if the eggs survive the winter, they can regenerate in the spring. But in general, you'll have to take into account your local climate.
Okay. Where do you add your vermiculture compost? Below the plant when planting or topping off the plant?
Yeah, there's two ways to do it. We recommend adding it at planting, and what that means is if you're planting a furrow row, or if you have just an individual single plant, like you're putting like a tomato or a cucumber or something like that, you do the least disturbance as possible. So if you're creating a furrow, you have to make the furrow. You can't not do it. You have to do it, but make the furrow and fill it with a half an inch or an inch of vermicompost before you plant your seeds. If you're doing a single location planting, do the same thing. Make a small hole, not very deep, but deep enough for the plant, and be sure to include a nice handful of vermicompost. So that's one thing. Now you can also use it as a top dressing. And you don't look, vermicompost is precious. And if you're buying it, it's expensive compared to regular compost. So you don't want to just scatter it all around. What you would do as for a top dressing is just put it right close to the perimeter of the plant on the surface of the soil, and then cover that up with some mulch, and you're good to go.
If you buy worm castings, does it have the same beneficial effect as homegrown vermiculture compost?
Yeah, it does. In fact, you might even get something better. There are increasing numbers of vermicomposters around the country. Some are better than others, but in general, there's a good product produced, and it's typically high quality because they're using something that you're not going to use at home, which is manure. You're using kitchen garbage, and that's excellent. But these producers will use high quality manures and some kind of organic matter. I know a guy in California who uses rice hulls. That's produces excellent vermicompost, and others use straw and whatever is available. But I wouldn't discount the quality of these commercial for sale vermicompost products. There's some really good ones out there.
What is the coldest coldest temperature these worms could tolerate?
Well, when it gets below 45 Fahrenheit, something like that, they're gonna get very sluggish. And at a certain point they won't be able to function. So basically we're looking at 50s and 60s is really the ideal.
Just scrolling through here. Are there any concerns about arsenic and chicken manure?
Arsenic in I am not aware of that. I know about arsenic in rice. That's a concern. I don't know how serious it is. I don't think it's all that serious, but it is a concern. Um, I don't know where the arsenic would come from in chicken manure. Would it come from industrial feedstocks, or is it just kind of a natural phenomenon? I really can't comment beyond that. I don't know.
All right. Well, Rafaela, that was the last question. Thank you so much for this fabulous presentation and for, oh, maybe one more popped in.
Yeah, let's hear it.
This person bought a bag of worm castings and I believe is afraid that it's too dry, that it isn't moist enough. Will that matter?
Yeah, it does matter. And if you have a situation like that, your worm castings are good, but you need to moisten them up before you apply them for whatever use you have in mind. Just whatever it takes. You can do it in the bag. You could do it on the ground or on a cement floor or something like that. But just you don't have to get it saturated, but get it damp. Because you want to activate the dampness is going to activate all the microbes in it, and it's loaded with microbes, and they're very important. You'll never see them, but take my
But
word.
they're there.
Very important. Yeah, that's right.
Does a worm farm smell?
Not really. If if you're concerned about, well, the things that really smell are meat. If you've got, I wouldn't recommend putting meat into your compost unless your compost is outside and away from your house, because as it breaks down, it smells. It does smell. So just be careful about that sort of thing. If you're using just kitchen garbage, that doesn't smell so great either as it breaks down. But you can put that in a place like in your basement or in your garage where it won't be a problem.
Okay. Oh, people are still inspired, Rafael.
Good. Keep it coming.
What about putting meat and eggs or eggshells into a vermicomposter?
Eggshells are great. I love eggshells, and when you can keep your eggshells in the egg carton, because the egg cartons are great. I'm amazed. I just feed them all day long to my worms. They just love it. But meat is really, unless you have a place where you're not going to be bothered by the smell, and where you can be sure that there won't be any poaching by local critters. You don't want to attract rats and all that stuff. So if you've got a secure situation, you can use the meat, but for most of us, it's not a good idea.
Okay.
But eggs themselves they're fine. Eggs and eggshells, fine. The only problem with eggshells is that they need to be broken down. So give them a good shattering before you put them in, so they'll have a head start on becoming worm food.
So if the pieces are too big, they might not ingest them.
They can't do anything with it. You'll find, you'll have your finished compost and you'll find eggshells in it. Well, it's just going to take a lot longer.
That makes sense. Okay. I think that might really be it this time. Thank you so much for this fabulous presentation and for taking the time to answer everyone's questions so thoroughly. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us, Rafaela.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. And please keep in mind that if a question occurs to you later, or if you have something you'd like to discuss, take my email. It's right there, and get in touch.
All right. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today.
You're welcome.